discussion. When I told him that his wife and family sent their love and were fighting for Kilmar to return home every day, he said that he was worried about all of you. That was his response. How are you dealing with this horrible ordeal and nightmare for the family? He said that thinking of you, members of his family, is what gave him the strength to persevere, to keep going day to day, even under these awful circumstances. He spoke several times about your 5-year-old son who has autism. 5-year-old son who was in the car in Maryland when Kilmar was pulled over by U.S. government agents and handcuffed. His 5-year-old son was in the car at that time. He told me that he was taken to Baltimore first. I assume that was the Baltimore detention center. He asked to make a phone call from there to let people know what had happened to him. But he was denied that opportunity. He said he was later taken with some others from Baltimore to a detention center in Texas. And some point thereafter, I don't know whether it was during hours or days, he was handcuffed, shackled, and put on a plane along with some others where they couldn't see out of the windows. There was no way to see where they were going in the plane. They didn't know for sure where they were going. They landed in El Salvador, and he was taken to CICAT prison. He was placed in a cell with, if I recall correctly, and don't hold me to it, of about 25 other prisoners at CICAT. He said he was not afraid of the other prisoners in his immediate cell, but that he was traumatized by being at CICAT and fearful of many of the prisoners in other cell blocks who called out to him and taunted him in various ways. He told me, and this was yesterday, that 8 days ago, so I guess 9 days ago from today, he was moved to another detention center in Santa Ana, where the conditions are better. But he said despite the better conditions, he still has no access to any news from the outside world and no ability to communicate with anybody in the outside world. His conversation with me was the first communication he had with anybody outside the prison since he was abducted. He said he felt very sad about being in a prison because he had not committed any crimes.
Yeah, the facility is such a horrible facility.
No.
Even the American government acknowledges its atrocities, the atrocious conditions.
¿Qué tengo que hacer, boludo? ¿Qué tengo que
The
hacer?
Trump administration is using CICAT specifically for that purpose as well, because it is a horrible, it's a prison that has worse conditions than the American prisons. It is a concentration camp. And I have long detailed the exact reasons as to why this administration is using CICAT and this deportation regime to inevitably ship away anyone and everyone they claim to be a terrorist for exercising dissent, their First Amendment rights, and tackling all of those issues. They're using multiple different court battles at the same time and trying to see how far they can take this, basically stress testing the system and what remains of the institutional control, what remains of the separation of powers, in an effort to write new rules, create new precedents, so they can legally, in air quotes, create this deportation regime. It's On the one hand, with the likes of Mahmoud Khalil, they're looking at basically taking away people's green card and legal permanent residency for the crime of their free speech. They want to criminalize free speech to the best of their ability for non-citizens first, documented legal permanent residents first, and then they will inevitably move to recently naturalized citizens. Then they'll inevitably move to naturalized citizens across the board. Then they'll inevitably move to natural-born U.S. citizens. These are things that the Trump administration has actively talked about. Okay? They also simultaneously need to erode due process. And if the courts respond to that, they need to violate court orders. They want to destroy the persuasive power that the highest court in the United States of America has, completely eviscerating the separation of powers so that no one can stand in their way. Part of that also means you have to eliminate dissent and any sort of legal battles that you might see. And a way to do that is to go to all of the largest law firms in the country and actively target them to make sure that they play ball, so that any law firm that has federal, that works in the federal court system cannot go into federal property. That's a thing that the Trump administration did. And I don't want to say quietly did that. They openly did it, right? With an executive order. But the problem was, Bud, you literally read like a Fed quoting a 15-year-old boy on a 4chan board? What are you talking about? I don't know who you're referencing in the chat. I will watch it later. If it's dude, it was real. Why are reports saying he's a gang member? I'm not a Fed or a racist.
No!
You think I'm a Fed? That's crazy. It's because you're saying such unimaginably stupid things while also maintaining your native background that people see that juxtaposition and assume that you must be cynically saying these sorts of things because you're being paid by the federal government to actively agitate in the chat, like COINTELPRO style. Okay, that's why. It's because they're trying to ascribe some semblance of intellect to your brain. Because what you're saying is so stupid and is so nonsensical with someone of your background, if you're being honest, that people are like, oh, this must be someone who is actively trying to sow dissent. Initially, it was a joke, and I don't think you're a federal agent at all. I think you were just kind of silly. But the reason why people think you're a Fed is because you're so goddamn clueless that people are like, this must be someone who hasn't had their brain erased and smoothened out by Fox News, but instead is like, there's a sign of life in there, you know? This is not like a vegetable. There's a sign of life in there, so there must be a secondary reason as to why they're behaving this way, you know? That's why people are calling you a Fed. Baba! Geldi! Anyway, I'm done responding to this person. In chat, you should also stop responding to this person, please. They should just kick back and listen to my words, all right?
When I asked him what was the one thing he would ask for in addition to his freedom, he said he wanted to talk to his wife. I told him I would work very hard to make that happen. I told him that in addition to his family, that all of you who are here today were fighting to bring him home. I told him that his brothers and sisters in his union, the sheet metal workers union, were fighting to bring him home. That brought a smile to his face. I told him that millions of Americans understand that what is happening to him is a threat to their own constitutional rights. I told him about the decisions of the federal courts, the district court, the Fourth Circuit Court, the Supreme Court. And I think that in addition to knowing that his family was fighting for him, all of that gave him strength. The fact that all of you here were fighting for him. I want to say something about the Trump administration's efforts to change the conversation about what this case is about. This case is about upholding constitutional rights for Abrego Garcia and for every American. The President Trump and the Trump administration wants to say that those who are fighting to stand up for our Constitution don't want to fight gang violence. That is an outright lie. That is a big, big lie. I, for one, have been fighting against transnational gang violence, especially MS-13, for over 20 years. Probably for longer than Donald Trump ever uttered those words, MS-13. Over 20 years ago.
Yeah. Okay, look, I'm gonna move on from these statements, but like, if you want to understand how incompetent this goddamn government is, here's an American doctor that received an email from immigration officials telling her to leave the country immediately, and she's not the only one. If you recall, a couple days ago, an immigration attorney stated on the timeline that her wife had gotten this exact notice of termination of parole on the same date, April 11th. Initially, I was like, I don't know if there is validity to this, or I don't know if, what happened here, right? Because it seemed so ridiculous that the federal government would actively do an email mass blast out to random people who are American citizens on accident of a notice of termination of parole. Except that is real. That is what happened. The government is basically doing like scam phishing emails at this point.
Time for you to leave the United States. That's the first sentence Lisa Anderson saw in an email she got from the Department of Homeland Security Friday.
The language seems pretty threatening to whoever it might actually apply to.
She thought it was spam at first, but the email was very real after Anderson had it vetted. What created confusion is that Anderson, who's a physician and lives in Cromwell, was born in Pennsylvania and is a U.S. citizen.
I really have no idea how my email ended up on that list unless someone else was using that as a false email.
She now carries her passport on the advice of attorneys and is looking for representation from an actual immigration attorney worried about legal repercussions, something she never thought she would ever need.
I don't have anything to do with immigration, and I never thought that I would be in need of the services of an immigration attorney either, and that's where I find myself.
This comes just days after two Boston